miracles when you move. Such an easy thing for you to do. Your hand is moving right now. You are still showing up at the tomb of every Lazarus. Your voice is calling me out. And right now, I know you're able. And my God, come through again. You can do all things. You can do all things but fail. 'Cause you never lost a battle. No, you never lost a battle. And I know you never will. Everything is possible by the power of the Holy Ghost. A new wind is blowing right now, breaking my heart and soul, taking over like a Jericho. My walls are all crashing down right now, and I know you're able. And my God, come through again. You can do all things. You can do all things but fail. 'Cause you never lost a battle. No, you never lost a battle. And I know you never. You can do all. Come on. You can do all things. You can do all things but fail. 'Cause you never lost a battle. No, you never lost a battle. And I know you never will. Never lost a battle. You never lost a battle. You never lost a battle. And no, you never will. You never lost a battle. You never lost a battle. You never lost a battle. Never.
It's good to see you guys. Welcome to Cokesbury Church. My name is Stephen. I'm the senior pastor here, and if this is your first weekend with us, we're really glad that you guys are here. I hope you had a chance to have some fun this weekend, that you had a chance to relax, and we're always honored when you guys show up. We're also grateful for those who are watching us online, so if you would help me say good morning to our online folks. It's always good to have them with us. So I would consider myself to be a fairly laid-back person. But one of the things I know is that all of us have little idiosyncrasies, right? Like I've got mine, you've got yours. One of mine is, it's this sense of organization. Like I like things to be where they're supposed to be. And in fact, when I travel, I've gotten to the place in my life where once I leave my driveway, my singular focus, other than arriving safely, is to just get to wherever I'm gonna go so I can unpack my stuff. Like I don't like having suitcases just sort of unaccounted for in the back of my truck, right? Like I wanna get there, get everything unpacked immediately, and I like all of our clothes put where they're gonna go. And when I say unpack, I mean straight up. Like all of our shoes have to be in a certain location, need to be in a certain way. Suitcases are put up, all the stuff in the bathroom. Everything has to be neat and organized, and then and only then can I go out and actually enjoy wherever it is that we are. A few weeks ago, Beth and I had a chance to kind of sneak off, and we went to Orlando, Florida. And she flew, and I drove. And that's a whole nother sermon, and probably several therapy sessions. But those of you that know us, we just don't travel together. It makes the trip a lot better if we don't ride in the car together for 14 hours. So it took me all day to get there. I mean, it is a haul to go from Knoxville to Orlando, and I was very focused. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, I gotta get to the condo, and I gotta get unpacked. And that rhythm just kept popping up the closer I gotta get to the condo, I gotta get unpacked. And I had timed this whole trip correctly. Like I could get to the place we were staying, I could get inside, get us unpacked, and I still had time to get to the airport to pick Beth up because she had a late flight that night. And so there I am, I'm down on 192, if you're familiar with that area, it's right there outside of Disney, and I'm about to turn into the complex where we're staying, and I was sitting at a light waiting on the arrow, and that is when everything changed. Like my focus completely got thrown off. In fact, I found myself suddenly being obsessed with not just getting unpacked, but it's what I saw that completely changed the direction of my life. Like my passion, my priorities, because I found myself in that moment just feet away from being able to unpack and to deal with that one obsession in my life. But I had completely forgotten about all the suitcases that I had in the back of my truck. In fact, I almost forgot, y'all, that I had to go pick up my wife. All because of it. It changed me in a moment, and I wanted it, and I was honestly willing to do just about anything to get it. In fact, it completely arrested my attention. And you may be thinking, well, what is it? Especially if you don't know me. Well, it's very simple. It's this right here. It's the hot now sign at Krispy Kreme. I mean, some of y'all know what I'm saying, right? Now, I know some of you look at me and you're like, I don't see that. I don't think this guy likes Krispy Kremes, right? Well, when I see the hot now sign, I'm honestly affected by that. In fact, if I'm driving you to the hospital and you have a severed arm and I see a hot now sign, my reaction is probably gonna be, I think you're gonna make it. Just put a Band-Aid on it, right? Because I'm gonna stop at Krispy Kreme. And I know, because every time I mention Krispy Kreme, somebody goes, Stephen, those will kill you. Well, listen, the death rate is 100%, right? We're all gonna die of something, and I promise you, there is no kale being served in heaven. So, for me, there's something almost spiritual about a Krispy Kreme donut. I mean, if you think about, they come down on a conveyor belt, right? And the sugar pours over them. That's almost like baptism. And then they get put in a carton with other donuts, and that's almost as if the local church is going out into the world to share the good news of Jesus, right? Listen, I had to have it, and it completely changed my passion and my priorities, all because I saw that hot now sign. And you may be thinking, well, Stephen, why in the world are you talking about this when we're supposed to be thinking about Jesus? Well, it's very simple. What happened to me physically that day is what I honestly hope happens to you spiritually in this moment. That we will all just get overwhelmed with the power of the resurrection, that it won't simply be an event that we gather together and we celebrate, that we refuse to just skate over or dismiss or underappreciate the significance of the empty tomb, that we will recognize that this is the defining moment, not only in all of human history, but for those of us that are following Jesus, this is the defining moment of your story and my story. And that we learn to tap into that power so that our sense of purpose and calling will propel us toward growth and toward challenge and toward just true, sheer life change. See, that's the point of this series that we started last week called Easter People. And last week, Mark Beebe was here, and he got us started by talking about Jesus' mother Mary and who she was, and then how the power of the resurrection changed the entire destiny of her life. And if you missed it, you can always go back and you can check it out through our app. It's waiting for you there on demand. And this week, we're gonna look at a guy named Peter. Now, as you may know, Peter was one of Jesus' disciples. He and Andrew started out as fishermen, and they made their living on the waters of the Sea of Galilee with two other would-be disciples, James and John. And as far as we know, while they did indeed work with their hands, Peter was raised in the Jewish tradition. In fact, by the time we get introduced to him in the stories of Jesus in the Gospels, we know that Peter was a disciple of John the Baptist. John the Baptist is the one that went out ahead and was prophesying that the Messiah, that the entire nation of Israel had been waiting on their entire life, that Jesus was the one they've been looking for. But then his life changed. One day he's out fishing and Jesus shows up and he's got a crowd pushing up against him, and he ends up getting into Peter's boat. And in Luke chapter 5, as Luke recounts this story, we get this. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, which is Peter, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I'm gonna let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come over and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all of his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. And then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid, for now you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on the shore, and they left everything and followed him. Now I would argue that from that moment forward, Peter was never the same again. In fact, this is the moment that the entire trajectory of Peter's life changes. He would go on to see his own mother-in-law who was sick get healed by Jesus. He was there when a guy named Jairus, his daughter had died, and Jesus showed up and literally raised her from the dead. It was Peter that would go on to walk on water. And then there was all the teaching, right? Like, one of the most captivating things about Jesus is it was the way that he taught. Jesus wasn't the only teacher to ever show up in that region, but he was different. Over and over in the Gospels, you find where the writers say that Jesus taught with a sense of deep authority, that when he spoke, people actually leaned in and they were intentional about listening. He would talk about the kingdom, how God's kingdom is out there, but it could be experienced right here, right now, that it was possible for human beings to help up there become a reality down here. They didn't have to wait until after they died to see the very fullness of what God had to offer. Jesus taught about how he came to bring freedom to the captive and good news to the poor, and that he would be the first one that would notice those who had been overlooked. He heard Jesus say that in God's economy, things like love and forgiveness and grace, that they would just abound. I mean, how could you not respond to that? And Peter did. In fact, Peter gave everything that he had. Eventually, he would become one of the closest disciples of Jesus. He was there during the transfiguration, right? Like he heard God's voice say, "This is my son, my chosen, listen to him." And Peter never left Jesus' side. One time Jesus comes to his disciples, and Matthew, another disciple, gives an account of this. Jesus asked the question, "Well, who do people say that I am?" And one by one, they went around, and each of the disciples gave a descriptor of who they were hearing that Jesus was. And then Jesus hones in and he asks, I think, the preeminent question that every single human being must come to grips with. He says, "But who do you say that I am?" It was Peter that said this in verse 16. "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." I mean, this is unbelievable to me. Peter listened to, Peter believed, Peter followed, Peter supported, Peter had Jesus back. It was Peter that pledged to remain loyal, even if that loyalty took him to his own grave. I wonder how many of us would have that said about us. That when our life comes to an end, somebody would stand up and say, "Man, this guy was all in." That's Peter. Which makes his actions on Jesus' final night so heartbreaking. I think it's almost shocking to the casual reader, but it was not shocking to Jesus, because Jesus told Peter exactly what was going to happen. Luke was there, and this is how he tells it. Jesus says to Peter, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers." But he replied, "Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death." Jesus answered, "I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me." If you're familiar with the story, you know exactly what happened. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. That thing that Peter said he would never do, it actually became a reality. In the moment that Jesus needed him most, that Jesus needed somebody, anybody, just to stand up and stop what was happening, Peter couldn't do it. And then there's this instant. Luke says, just as he, that's Peter, was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Understand, this is a firsthand account. This is not some preacher preacherizing the text. Like, he was there, he witnessed it, knew about the glance, could hear Peter crying. Honestly, cannot imagine that moment. Just the sheer flood of emotion, or the realization of the actions that you've taken and the consequences of that, just the disappointment, the guilt, and the shame. I cannot imagine what it would look like for Jesus to peer across the room at me. I think it's a reminder that failure is a very powerful experience. And it is a reality for every single human being, regardless of where you are in your journey with Jesus. Some of us have been raised to believe that if your relationship with Jesus is strong enough, then you're not gonna make mistakes, and you're not gonna sin, and you're not gonna have shortfalls in your life. And that's just not true. There is no cosmic fire insurance. The moment you said yes to Jesus, it's not like you got some great insurance policy that says that your life is just gonna go exactly the way you thought it would go. And that's just not the case for those of us that are following Jesus. It's a part of the human experience. You and I cannot escape it. And one of the things I'm discovering in my own life, and I think it's true in this text, is that you really don't know who you are until your character gets tested. Think about it. When life's going great, you got confidence, right? You're feeling good. You approach life with a little bit of swagger. You wake up in the morning and you kind of got your chin up, your chest out, and you kind of just take things in stride and you feel good about what's going on. But then you introduce just a little bit of adversity, and then you find out who you really are. It's in that moment you find out what you're really made of. I mean, think about this. For the rest of Peter's life, he was going to be marked by this one event. Every time he saw a fire pit, every time he smelled wood burning, it would remind him of how he had failed. Every time he went over to see somebody, if they were cooking something, it would be a reminder that he let his best friend down. It would be this constant reminder of his own inadequacy and his own shortcomings and his own brokenness. I mean, had the story stopped right there, that would have been the end of Peter's story. He would have done some really great things. But in the moment when he was needed most, he did not step up to the plate. He did exactly what Jesus said he would do, and his life forever would have gone in history as being a complete and utter failure. And at best, he would have gone back and started fishing again, hoping that nobody remembered what had happened. But fortunately, that's not the end of his story. And the good news is, if you failed, that's not the end of your story either. Listen, I know that life is hard. And life is seldom black and white. The path of your life and my life, it is very seldom ever straight. I mean, there are moments, you know this. There are moments when we stumble, or there are moments when we get knocked down, we get hurt, we come up short, we disappoint somebody we love, we fall flat on our face. But that does not necessarily get to end your story. See, those things, they don't get to define us. They don't have to haunt us and continue to rear their ugly head from time to time. Our past does not have to paralyze us or stop us in our tracks. And Jesus needed his disciples to understand this, especially Peter. And so after the resurrection, the disciples go back to where they started. They're out fishing. And Jesus shows up, and this happens in John chapter 21. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It's the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. You see, the history of Peter's life, he met Jesus when he was fishing. He jumped into the water when he walked out in faith to meet Jesus when he was standing out in the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, which makes sense, right? They're in the ocean, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring me some of the fish that you've caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. So Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and he did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Now, I don't want you to miss what's happening right there. Not only is there a rehearsal of the big events in Peter's life, but I think Jesus is being very deliberate. He came to them early in the mornings. If you want to go catch fish, you got to get out early, right? You got to get out before all the other boats get there. which means they had not eaten yet. And so there Jesus is. He's reminding them of their purpose, right? Because all the way back in the very beginning, when they were called to be his disciples, they were out fishing. The exact same thing happened. And you remember what Jesus said to them? You're gonna be fishers of men. It's like this metaphor. It's this example of what their calling and their purpose is gonna be. You're gonna go out and you're gonna experience people giving their life to me. It's gonna be unbelievable. But he had to deal with Peter's brokenness. So he made breakfast. Just a couple of days earlier, every time he saw a fire, he'd remember his own failure. Every time he smelled smoke, he would remember his own inadequacy. But now Jesus deliberately starts another fire. And they go on and they walk along the seashore and they have this long conversation where Jesus brings restoration to Peter's life. He sets him free from that pain and that guilt and that shame that he was carrying with him. So that every time he smelled smoke, he remembered his own redemption. Every time he saw a fire, he'd remember the freedom that Jesus gave him. It's amazing how Jesus can take something that seems so awful and through the power of his resurrection can turn it for the good. Because if you know anything about Peter, you know that Peter would go on to launch the church. Peter would be the one that wound up preaching one of the greatest sermons that was ever preached. Peter would go on from the seashore where Jesus brought redemption after that meal, and he would literally see tens of thousands of people give their life to Jesus. It was Peter that stood up to the establishment, and it was Peter that would go on to fight for the redemption and the reconciliation of the then no world. And it was Peter that had the confidence to give his life for the sake of Jesus. And had he not cooked breakfast on the shore that day, I'm not sure that that would have happened to Peter. The entire trajectory of his life got changed simply because they shared a meal. See, it's a big deal that you and I understand the power of God's redemption, that we understand the depth of God's grace, that we tap into the power of the resurrection, because if the tomb is empty, that means that nothing is impossible. And if nothing is impossible, then that means anything is possible. Not just collectively for the human race, but that's true for your life and my life. I don't know what you've been wrestling with over the past 7 days. I don't know what's gotten you sideways. I don't know how you failed. I don't know what sin you tried to keep hidden inside. I don't know the sense of guilt or shame that you may be carrying with you. I don't know the level of fear that you might be experiencing in your personal life, but I do know that Jesus understands. And I do know that it's in his power that we can move forward in our life. See, it's the meal. That's what makes communion so powerful for me. Is it's not just some symbolic thing that we do, but it's that reset. It's the same reset that Jesus gave his disciples. It's the exact same reset that Jesus gave Peter at his darkest moment. It's that opportunity for us. You may know the story. On his final night, Jesus got his disciples together in a room and they shared a meal, and when the meal was over, the scriptures say that Jesus took a loaf of bread and he broke it. And he gave thanks to God and he gave it to his disciples and he told them, eat this, for this is my body, which is given for you. And when they finished, Jesus took a cup of wine and he gave thanks to God and he gave it to his disciples and he said, here, take and drink, for this is my blood, which is poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. And then later on in the scriptures, Jesus is quoted as telling them to do this in remembrance of me. Don't do it out of obligation. Don't do it out of fear. Don't do it because somebody else told you need to do it. But every once in a while, get together and share this meal and remember me. See, memory is a very, very powerful thing. Memory can change the trajectory of your entire life. So today we got a chance to gather with God's people at God's table. And even if you're watching at home, you got time to go get some stuff together and you can take it with us. We've got a number of stations down front. I've got some friends who are gonna come help me serve it. If you need gluten-free, you're gonna come right to the middle. But y'all listen, I know I say it every time we do it, this is the best meal that you and I are gonna eat all week long. Not because it's great grape juice, not because it's great bread, but because of what it means. It's a reminder that we are somebody, that Jesus laid his life down for us, that his grace is freely available, whether you've fallen once or you're on your 10,000th redo. It's a reminder that we get a reset for the next 7 days, that this is our opportunity to say, God, I'm gonna clear the deck and I'm gonna let you come in and I'm gonna do my best each 24-hour period to just follow your leading, follow in your footsteps, to do and to be exactly who you say I need to be. The thing I like about communion is it does not belong to Cokesbury Church. It's not a United Methodist thing. This is God's table. And so to take communion, you don't have to clean yourself up. You don't have to try to act perfect. You just simply got to profess your faith in Jesus Christ. And so I hope you'll come, and I hope you won't hurry. And I want you to know the altars of our church are always open. So if you need a minute to absorb a reset, to get your mind focused on what you're gonna have to deal with this week, then I'd encourage you to kneel and pray. You come now in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.